Hit the lights!
You've discovered the Halfwatt podcast. We want to educate and entertain by tapping into the most trusted source of new technology, the ones installing and innovating it. You, the tradespeople that build from the ground up. Join us as we talk with industry leaders, veteran contractors, and even some young blood.
Welcome aboard. I'm your host, Mike Brooks. I'm happy to have you here. Today we're interviewing Mr. Sean Martin, who is a PM with Performance Systems Integration here in Portland. Welcome aboard, Sean.
Thanks for having me. This is quite the experience.
Good. I'm glad you like it.
Yeah.
So tell me about project management, just the 1,000-foot level, because this is your genre, you know. And full disclosure, Sean is also a NICE at level 4 in fire alarm, so he is a technician and turned project manager. So you kind of come up through the ranks. So tell me about project management. What does it mean to you?
Well, so project management is in a nutshell kind of making sure you're doing what was purchased, right? I mean, there's a component of doing it right, but it's the real yeoman's work, if you will, is taking what the sales guy sold that you should participate in and itemize, setting it all out with a schedule and dialing in the right people from the right areas of the business to execute the work and make sure they don't go off script. So the sales guy sells a thing, you take it to a designer, he formally publishes a design on a schedule. You make sure that the material budget or the material list you have jives with what the sales guy sold. They're not wildly out, and if you are, you figure out why and fix it. And then it comes down to scheduling, and you need to have the talent, right? The licensed technician, the certified technician, whatever, that you can sit down with them and go, here's what you're going to go do.
Okay.
Here are the parts, here are the drawings, here's the day you need to be there, or this is, you can call the site and fit it in your schedule. And then when it's all done, let me know. And you have to check in with all these various peoples and get the final, get the inspection, get to whoever needs to come. And in low voltage, sometimes, there's an electrical inspection. Sometimes there's a fire inspection. Sometimes there's a third-party inspection. Sometimes just an owner approval. Yeah,
is there usually a commissioning agent involved in a lot of the? I know that in the smaller job, probably not, but in the large, I mean, you project manage some pretty good size.
So when you're doing
places.
Controls, HVAC controls, they usually have a third-party commissioning engineering team that comes through and does whatever checks they want to do to make sure your FMS code.
What is FMS?
Facility management system. Your thing that turn the fans on and off, heat and cool, move dampers. They make sure that all those functions are done per a testing script. If you're going to do a smoke control system, which is like a facility management system that's designed specifically with the life safety compartment in mind, then that is a third-party knowledgeable individual that's a code and is looking at the parts of the building code that have to be honored, the survivability, the functional sequence, and all this stuff, and when it goes into trouble, how it reports it. And then when you get into like your access control or VMS world, a lot of time the final buy-off is the end user. Does it behave the way I want it, right? They write specs all day, but there's no spec for programming, timing, and whatnot when it comes to, an access control system, a small box one. You'll find it in the bigger facilities. You get through all those approvals, and each step along the way, you set up little milestones, little flags in your schedule where you can progressively bill for the money. And then at the end of it, when you've collected all the money, except for a little bit of that, and then you write out a few more documents to close the job that, issue a warranty for the work we've done, guaranteeing our work for a set period of time, and give what we actually ended up doing, because a designer can put something out there, but the tech gets there and someone puts something in the way. And it's just better to move the device a few feet and mark up the drawings. And so
but that would be like a change order then. You would be the person in charge of handling all of the change orders and the billing and the
so
not directly, but
in that entire line of little flags and process, if there's a change in what was sold, what was purchased by the client, then there's a whole aspect of change management. And depending on where you're at in that process, start to finish, that change could be very minor.
Okay, so then you need to be able to read and interpret contract language.
Yes.
So there's a legal aspect to it that you have to be able to interpret.
A contract is really what you have to honor when things go wrong, when there's a dispute. There's a whole terms and conditions of it. Yeah, they put this scope of work for this much money in the contract, but then what follows is 4 to 5 pages of terms and conditions and insurance requirements, and how much they can use something called retention, where if I hire you to do a $1,000 job, in certain states that number can be variable, but in Oregon it's 5%, meaning if I hire you to do a $1,000 job, you can bill me $1,000 less 5%.
And that you're retaining.
And I hold on to that until I'm completely satisfied, and then I give that money up when I'm completely satisfied.
So that's different than a lien.
That is different than a lien, yeah. A lien is physically against the property.
Okay.
The physical property. So like when an owner disputes it, and a contractor, who's doing the work, they can go issue a lien against the property, meaning there's a judgment that has to be adjudicated by a court before that owner can sell the property.
Okay. So
you can't do that to government.
Okay, but so we touched a lot of things.
Yeah.
So retention is a part of the contract that is held back until the client is completely satisfied that you've accomplished all of what's going on, and you got the entire contract and all the conditions, plus all the other contractors that you're dealing with, and then depending on the type of system that you're putting together, there can be special processes and things involved like that, like you talked about with an HVAC system that's handling smoke control, then that's a UL listed thing, and then you've got to make sure that, because I've been involved in that at a hospital where the commissioning agent at this hospital I was working at literally took a bucket of sand and 3 smoke flares and lit the thing off in an OR. This is before the building was ready to go. And that was it. And smoke went everywhere, and it went everywhere. It went everywhere. And he looked up and he went, "You're not ready. I'll see you in 2 weeks," and walked out. We put the flares, he put the smoke grenades out, walked out. And 2 weeks later, they were ready. We lit the smoke things off, and that's exactly where it stayed. It was in that room. Yeah. And so it did its job. But it was a real eye opener, because there's a couple of buildings like that where they did that at, and the smoke would just go to a certain point and stop. Like what the doors open or close, it didn't matter. The containment was such that it didn't. But the first time, man, we blanketed the whole building. I mean, it was clearly they didn't know what they were doing.
And in the low voltage world, it's very important to distinguish between a designer and an engineer, right? And even then, you want to distinguish between an engineer and a fire protection or certified fire protection engineer that writes the rational analysis. They're not all the same.
Wow.
We sit in an area as the Halfwatts that we know how to make the system work. We know how to program it, terminate it, test it all out, and follow what some high-level engineer sat down, because the aspects of a building, and it's why this is, at least in this state, unusually under the architect's auspices, is when they lay out the system, they lay out the egress pathways, which is part of your code summary. They lay out the finishes of the building in a way that you have rated emergency exits that follow 2 hours. They lay out the principles of HVAC and how smoke will propagate in a smoke modeling system.
So they're dealing with stratification, smoke stratification, and layering.
They have a model fire, what's likely to catch fire in the space. There's so much energy in that fire. They make a few assumptions, and smoke propagates this way, and then they go, here's how we protect people getting out of the building.
Wow.
And they size.
So even the stuff that they put in the wall coverings have to be,
if it's along
thought about.
Yeah, and then it has to be inspected through the construction process.
Okay.
And that's where.
So don't put any super flammable, super smoke making pictures on the wall.
Well, like something you'll find in fire design, because I was a tech who became a designer, who became a PM.
So you've done all 3 of these.
Yes, you have to get a nice set 4. You have to do a difficult
Sadly,
project
I'm
design.
only a 2.
And there are some people that they not all nice at fours are equal. Some of them, you know, I did a complex job. What did you do? It was a building with 3 restaurants in it and hoods. And it's like, okay, that's not simple, but what did you do? Well, I did 1 million square foot office building.
But it's not Intel, or it's not, you know,
it's
Nike or something.
There are really complex buildings out there. I remember looking at plans for a building a few years ago, and they were going to have what was referred to as a fire service elevator installed, because it was going to be a 45-story building or something. And it was basically, when you say those words, and words are key in the code, when you say the words fire service elevator, you now have an elevator that is to be used by the fire department in an emergency for evacuation or other operations, because you don't want your firefighters tiring hauling that gear up 35 floors.
So it's not an elevator that goes into fire service mode. It's actually an elevator that will stay functional during fire.
Correct.
For them to use. So it doesn't really go into a fire service mode.
But it likely will, but sometimes they'll have a particular mode they put it in that then runs it. But that's what it ends up doing. It ends up slapping in a bunch of like firewall ratings around the lobby and all the control wiring. And it's almost like it bolts into the smoke control system in terms of its level of importance. And, you know,
man, I'm 27 years in the industry or something like that. I've never even knew that existed. I mean, I knew fire service, obviously, but
some stuff is new each year, and sadly, every moment there is a tragedy somewhere, right? And that has been how codes and standards have come about. You go build a house 150 years ago. It's some dude with his buds. You know, they go down to the hardware, whatever, they grab some wire and they pull it in the buildings and they land it because their friend who done electrical told them to, right? And then you have massive fires in neighborhoods. You have, you know, people who, you know, businesses that are less reputable in this country and in many others who block the emergency exits in factories, and things happen and people die. And then there's an outpouring, and then there's this group of people going, how do we make it safer?
Got it.
The code committees and those people.
So the code is built upon the deaths and the dismemberment and maiming. I mean, I kind of have alluded to that in my classes. I said, you know, this code here is written upon the deaths of everybody before you, and even in like the NEC code where you've got some product that somebody puts out. Oh man, this is the greatest thing ever, and they put it together and it explodes and causes mayhem. Photovoltaics are a good example. Yeah, I love photovoltaics. I think that's a great product. So when photovoltaic first became something in the NEC, I thought, I'm going to do my continuing ed because I could on that. Yeah. And then I thought, wow, I'll see how quickly this article grows. And it, doubled the next time, the next session, because they had no way to shut them off. So now you've got these acres of photovoltaics and no off switch except the sun, which isn't going to turn itself off until it sets. So now you see all these, it's not you can go cover it with tarps.
And in Oregon, just to be clear, I'm an ISET 4, which is national certification. Oregon doesn't recognize it. You have to be a low voltage limited electrician here to get any traction, even in fire alarm. And so I am required to do my regular CCUs, and this last go round, there was a big section on photovoltaic. Yeah. And so it's part of its lessons learned, from tragedy, part of its lessons learned from practicality, and part of it is new technology. Like when I started in the industry,
when did you start in the industry?
2005.
Okay.
So in many ways, that's not that long ago, but when I sit down and count the numbers, it feels...
It's a long time.
Yeah. All the fire alarm systems I ever worked on, they use plain old telephone phone lines, not VoIP, not anything else, the old B1 lines, the ring and tip. And it was written that you shall have 2 lines dedicated. Yep. And there was one exception that if you couldn't dedicate it, you had to have the ability to seize that line from someone else. Not allowed anymore.
All right, RJ31X and all that.
Well, you're not allowed to use phone lines as your primary transmission port.
I know.
It's a dying technology. And so the code had to be, or the standard had to be updated and amended to allow for other means of transmission. And once other means of transmission has come in, it's still being reviewed because a phone line could only shoot so much data. Right. And there had to be something on the other end listening for that data. And it was this account number, which 3 to 4 digits, which they correlated to an address, they on the other end. And then sometimes 3 or 4 signals.
Yeah.
Alarm, trouble, supervisor,
restorals.
and then there were restorals.
Everything's good now.
And I can shove so much data through a radio interface now that we can send what device went into alarm. They can give full details all the way to the fire department.
Nice.
You know, you can pull history reports through remote access. And it's just the technology has gone there. And so the refinements that go into 72 and 70, which are the respectively the protective signaling code and the National Electrical Code, and then other standards that have come about as a result. Like there was one I got a chance to read, NFPA 760, was for a special releasing system which used atomized or water molecules.
Oh, I've seen some video on that.
Yeah, it was the Vitalik vortex system.
And it doesn't, like, it was in a library, and you could see the system deploy, look like steam. Yeah. And then the guy goes, "There's no water on the walls. There's no water on any of the papers." And you can actually, it knocked the fire out immediately. Yeah. It was amazing. And the guy goes, "Yeah, and this is dry water, if you can imagine such a thing."
So the guy explaining it to me, they're the only shop around that did it. We had to interface a fire system to it.
Oh, so you actually saw one of these things?
Oh yeah. We put it in out at the Portland airport.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, in one of those new buildings, they had some highly sensitive rooms with electronics and people, very critical, and they wanted a releasing system, and someone talked them into doing that instead of a Novak system. And the guy was there, and I was like, "How's all this work?" He goes, "Well, you have these activations, you have this stuff, and then this happens and it releases a nitrogen into the space. And then once it gets down to this pressure, this other valve opens and shoots a slug of water that's a fixed amount down the tube. And then right where the heads are, because I'm like a deluge head, there's a little baffle plate that sits there and oscillates so much, it breaks it apart into just water molecules like a water vapor. And he goes...
So it was... I knew it was the heads that did it, but I didn't know that they oscillated.
They're just sitting there wiggling, vibrating against it.
No kidding.
And it was amazing. Like I went and watched some of their videos on it's on YouTube. You can go see it. It's Vitalik vortex system. And they were doing it in like a dam energy vaults where they convert all the electricity to different voltages for transmission. They set one off in there and the place was dry.
He said it won't conduct.
Yeah,
it won't conduct electricity because it's nitrogen. There's no electrical continuity between the molecules.
It displaces the oxygen, right, and then it cools.
Wow.
Right, and so that's where it's pulling energy out of the fire. If you ever study entropy and thermodynamics, right, like it's kind of like how an AC system works, where you make it an energy void, and that's how it pulls the heat out of the air. It's nuts.
Thermodynamics? What? Sorry. Wait a minute. What do you know about I thought you were a PM.
Yeah. So
where did thermodynamics come into this?
So full disclosure, Portland native. I grew up in the north end of town, and there wasn't a lot of money to go around. It was the 80s and the 90s, and I apparently scored, and they apparently published it, decent on my SATs as a junior.
Wow.
And so I got it's not, it doesn't seem decent to me when 1600's the win, and I only get a 1210, but I'm like in the fall of my junior year.
You're in like fourth grade.
Yeah. and I got approached by the Navy, the military, and they wanted to chat, and I didn't have any plan for college. I was a not very skilled musician. I didn't have the time to practice. I was working. And I said, sure, I'll come talk. And they gave me a sample test. And I knocked it out of the park. They said, well, would you be interested in learning more? You could do pretty much any job there is. And I went and I sat for basically the aptitude test they have. They have a fancy name for it called it's an acronym, ASVAB. Yeah. And I got... I
have a story on that too.
I got a 91.
Nice.
Out of like 99. And the guy there was picking jobs. He goes, well, I got this job. And I was like, I'll do that, aircraft electronic technician. And Gould did the paperwork, signed it, all that, and then went back and chatted with the recruiter who had taken me there, and he goes, hey, would you be interested in a different career? And I'm like, well, he goes, well, you did so well. you would qualify for this other additional field. It's a quick test. It was 80 questions or something. I'd have to make an appointment, and if you pass and you want to do it, the time to tell whoever we're meeting is then. Like don't stew on it, right? It's typical recruiter, make the decision and go.
Quick,
make a life-altering decision as a minor.
Sign up for 8 years now, will you?
Yeah, and I went and I passed, and the job was to be to work in nuclear power.
Oh, wow.
Nuclear propulsion, actually, for the Navy. And
so you were an EM, electrician's mate, right?
So they just have you as nuke general until you actually go to boot camp, and then the needs of the Navy take over, and you're
I did not know that.
Either a seaman recruit.
So you couldn't choose mechanical versus electronic versus electrical.
But you can put in your wish list, and I chose ET, and I ended up being an EM. Thank goodness I did, because and in there they.
So for everybody who's listening, an ET is electronics technician, and then an EM is electrician's mate.
Right. And the MM is a machinist mate. Right. And so what followed after boot camp was a grueling 2-year training. It's very modified. It's very military specific, meaning they teach you what they need you to know, right? It's not like going to a college where you get a well-rounded experience. They itemize out exactly what they need you to have. They give you the list, and everything you learn is in service to that list. They call them guide objectives. But it was be in your seat, 7 a.m. in uniform, and you're done with the instructor portion at 4:45, and you have 50-minute sessions, 10-minute breaks, and then a half hour for lunch. And then you have to come back and study 3 to 5 hours in that same room, the material that evening.
Wow.
You do that 5 days a week.
Wow. And
you log your hours.
Yeah, that's much more intense than I went through.
And that was.
We would go to school all day and then drink most of the night.
Yeah.
It was a whole different protocol.
No, it was you had a minimum of, they started with like 15 hours of study, and that a week, minimum 2 hours a night.
Yeah, because when I went to boot camp, it was in Orlando, and so NPS, the beginning of NPS school was there.
Yeah.
And I saw a bunch of the nukes that went to that school, but I didn't know anything about it. Like I had no idea. I obviously knew what they were going to do, but I didn't know, but we also had, signalmen, skivvy waivers, and torpedoesmen's mates. So, I mean, it was a whole bunch of different.
In retrospect, it's quite amazing. In the middle of it, it's very painful and very stressful. But they basically take someone who has engineering aptitude, and they shove so much information, and they can safely operate a nuclear propulsion plant.
Wow!
In 2 years.
Wow!
And so I was a Navy certified nuclear operator at 20, and couldn't drink publicly.
You didn't miss anything.
Yeah, but I'm saying, I couldn't. I wasn't that milestone of age.
You couldn't drink because you weren't 21.
Couldn't drink because I was. I wasn't 21. I couldn't drink in public, and so, but I could go operate
you could run a reactor, and you run a carrier, correct?
I got assigned to a carrier. I didn't want to be on a subs, and I asked for a West Coast assignment. The schools were all back east, and I got a carrier out of Everett, Washington, and I did.
Now, which carrier were you on?
I was on the Abraham Lincoln.
Okay.
I don't know if they're still on the West Coast anymore. They might have gone back for major refueling or something. I did that, and I was there, and there were several things you learn, and several people that influence you, and there were people that liked it, that wanted to stay, and there were people that wanted trying to encourage you to stay. And there was a career counselor who, for the department, was like, hey, was like, do you want to stay or not? And I was like, not really. He goes, well, then what are you doing? I go, what do you mean? He goes, set yourself up. Learn everything you can while you're here. Get the certifications, do the stuff. You can set yourself up, or you can do this for 4 years and go work retail. Right, yeah. And so while I was there, and
were you in a 6-year or an 8-year enlistment?
So mine was 6.
Because it's 2 years. 2 years of inactive.
No, it's 2 years of school, 4 years of active, and then 2 years of inactive. But I could do my delayed entry as part of my inactive, so I only had an extra year.
So when I joined, it was a 6-year hitch total. So I
Mhm.
did a 3x6, which was 3 years active, 3 years reserve.
Yeah.
And then I did a 9-month extension in the middle of that and extended it to 5. So I did like 8 years, 9 months. Was
Mhm. Yeah.
But it wasn't a nuke.
No. So, but
It was a total different.
What it meant was, I qualified. I was one of my skill sets was understanding and relating the knowledge that was presented from a practical standpoint. I suffered through book learning and just trying to absorb all the concepts because I apply them, and that's how I learn. So once I got to heart of the training phase, we learned how to qualify a watch station, learn how to. Then I was ahead. I qualified first. I qualified faster than the honorman from the power school class in my rate. Wow. Like he was bitter. Wow. And so I got to the carrier.
So explain to the listeners that in the Navy, once you have these watch positions, and in Sean's case, it's the engineering, it's the folks who run the reactors on the carrier. And I was on a cruiser, and I never knew much about the nuke side of the house. But you, in order to be a watchstander, you have to go through all the PQS, all the qualifications to do that. And then you were an EL, correct? An engineering officer of the watch, or a junior?
I was a propulsion plant watch supervisor when I left.
Okay.
An EL or a watch officer is an actual officer.
Those are all going to be commissioned officers.
Or rarely they'll have a watch officer be like a chief.
Okay.
But it's the enlisted half. So the watch officer is responsible for the plant and the operation of the reactor. The watch supervisor is responsible for the watch standards. So
got it. Oh, so you were overlooking all the people who were running all the
outside in the spaces, the main spaces, turning valves, doing stuff. You're supervising every evolution, and that's on
a reactor.
Yeah.
Wow.
On a propulsion plant. I mean, a reactor is just a hot rock that makes steam.
20s.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And so first step though was I qualified an operator position. An operator position is you're sitting there, you're operating the equipment, you're taking logs, something goes wrong, you have to, inform the rest of the team and then shut off whatever it is or bypass whatever, and you're part of a war machine. So it's not like you can just be lackadaisical, right? It's very serious. And then once you qualify it, you're a noob. So you have to practice it to get good. So starting out, not as good, 3 years, 4 years later, pretty good. Because you're practicing and you're spending 5 hours or 6 hours a day, sometimes on a rotation doing that, So I qualified what's called a switchgear operator, and I also ended up becoming a work center supervisor at like 21 or 22. So I had 22 electricians assigned to me, and I had an assistant, and we wrote the maintenance schedules because in the military. Right out here, you have people that operate a command center, security guards, whatever, and you're part of the repair crew. And there's usually a facilities maintenance crew. Well, you're all of that combined in the military. So I was used to doing. That's
a good way to look at it. Yeah.
I was used to doing maintenance. I was used to having to deal with people's personal problems,
operating it,
and then operating it. And then it becomes you break something. Well, you're going to be standing there fixing it too.
Yeah.
So it's real.
And you're thousands of miles out to sea.
Yeah.
And the repair parts got to be flown in by God. So, you're like.
Well, and so I did that. I was a work center supervisor. I moved over to the supply group in that department. So I was the guy that would find any part on the ship that we needed for the reactor department. I would get stuff flown in. I would report directly to the 06 department head anyway. So
that's right. You would have a captain as a department head. So your chief engineer on a carrier, is it usually a captain?
The Chang is a commander because there's a chief engineer. There's a chief engineer, and he does just engineering, which is the rest of the ship, and then reactor department does the propulsion and the power generation and stuff. And so I would end up once a week as an E5 enlisted, second class, in a meeting with a bunch of lieutenant commanders and the captain. And here's where we're at with the parts. Here's my CAS rep list. Here's where we're at. I'm having some trouble with Suppo. He doesn't want to sign the paperwork, even though you give me your signing authority. Would you have a chat with him, please? And he did, which is a lot of power to give a 22-year-old.
That is.
And so, but it was also training the next gen. It was teaching them. It was, look, hey, I'm not going to be here forever. here's how this works.
Don't reactors just operate themselves? I mean,
Maybe in the civilian world, I don't know.
Maybe in the movies.
But I mean, and it's also a lot of stress. It's a lot of it is such an important job, and there's a lot of oversight.
Well,
a lot
I know
of people,
on my ship,
Yeah.
they had drills, reactor scram drills, and some sort of casualty drills daily, and it was such a common occurrence on the Truxton that you didn't know what was real, you didn't know what wasn't real.
Yeah,
the guy was completely monotone when he talked. There was no emotion in their voice.
You get used to it.
Yeah, and it was very.
Yeah.
You know, and you knew it because you always train like you fight, right? So you're always prepared for it. But my world was topside, so I didn't know what was going on in the reactors. All I knew is like they're going to cut the power off, kill our equipment. That was my whole shtick.
But there was so much of and rightly so in many ways, and a microscope on you. Logs need to be inspected, and third parties came out and checked and drilled you and checked you on your knowledge. You don't, I mean, as much as I hated it, you don't want to skimp on that, right? Particularly when the average age of your nuclear power plant operator is 22, right?
Oh, man.
And so
I just never really thought about that.
But I mean, and we're not talking like the EOW, we're talking like the guys out there
guys
turning wrenches
really
and cleaning the valves and stuff. Yeah. And a lot of the people that did stay, they became the EOWs. They became the lieutenant commanders I interact with. They would do 12 or 20 years as enlisted or senior chiefs, and they went over and put on bars. And so there was a lot of people with a lot of knowledge, a lot of experience overseeing this larger group of people. It wasn't like, a bunch of idiots or anything. I mean, it was, but it was so stressful and so unpredictable in terms of it's hard to build a life on that. And so I did my 6 when they asked me about it, and I said I politely decline. And I decided I didn't want to do nuclear power. And
you didn't want to just jump out and go run nuclear plants?
No. I mean, if it's the scrutiny is the same, right? And again, rightly so. Yeah. If you get careless, you have a place like Chernobyl that's contaminated for tens of thousands of years, and people die really horrible deaths. Yeah. And they have these plants out in the Midwest, in the middle of like cities. Like, you better have. Yeah. You better have that oversight. You better have a good training and retention and whatever model. Like, I just felt it wasn't for me. And I'd lived now, after leaving Portland, I lived on the East Coast in the South, and I'd lived in upstate New York, and then I'd lived in Washington, and I traveled on the ship. I saw, Singapore, saw Australia, Hong Kong, saw Bahrain, and while that's a pretty small sample size given the rest of the world, picking a place to live, stateside, I decided I just want to come back.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I stayed with some family after I got out and started looking for options. I was going to use the money, because originally the money was going to be the GI Bill,
so
college.
That's the new GI Bill.
But this was before the new GI Bill. This was just the Navy college.
So you got in between VEEP
and
the GI Bill.
Yeah.
Yeah. I got in under VEEP, which I don't want to talk about that. That was an ugly scene.
So I was a hair's breadth away from signing up for community college. I was looking for work. Every place that I interviewed turned me down because I had too much on my resume.
Wow.
And I ended up putting in an app to join a specialty firm, like to be basically a headhunting firm that specialized in placing former military. And they would go out to tech companies or whoever and invite them to a job conference where you could do just like speed date interviews. Yeah. And so, and the first 2 days were just like, here's what we do, here's how we do it. And then consulting with us, kind of like, and it's irritating because it's, how some people have the elevator pitch and all that sales garbage. This is, how do you take someone who's been reprogrammed in using naval terms or military terms, make their experience relatable, particularly without any cuss words and fewer acronyms. So you've like 2 minutes to explain yourself, go. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Here's why. How would you rephrase that to really mean that? And so there was some work group together, and then the second or the third.
You weren't working for them. You were using their services to get placement.
Yeah, they get their fee from the company that hires you, right, as a finder's fee. So they're investing in you. And I had 4 interviews scheduled. One was with a company called Genie Corporation. They build mobile work platforms and stuff. They were looking for someone to help do maintenance in their Renton plant. Okay. Another one was a company called Vestas. They're a big global wind turbine company. They're looking for people to. Another one was there was a Hyundai plant. No, there was a Korean chip manufacturer in Eugene who wasn't interested in. And then they had two fire and security companies. One called Convergent Technologies, and
that's a small little company.
And the other one was a company called Siemens.
Yeah, they're another small concern. Yeah.
I had not heard of either of them.
Well, I had neither until I got in the industry, and then you realize that these are behemoths. You know?
Yeah. And the guy that interviewed me from Convergent, which you should look at getting in on, is a guy named Mario Godone.
Oh, I know Mario.
And he's a good guy. He's a great guy. He was sitting there. We're just talking the high levels. He's talking about the companies, and he's still interested. I'm like, sure, like whatever. I didn't know anything about it. And then I went to the next interview, which was with Siemens, and it was a guy named Doug Green and a guy named Nick McClarity. Yeah. And they liked me, and the Siemens people were the one that followed up. I canceled the Genie one and I met the Genie guy later because I knew Chris Anderson and Terry Lockshire and a whole bunch of guys that were electrician nukes with me on the boat.
You get a good memory.
You know,
wow.
Those. Well, I mean, you can't forget a whole lot of that.
Yeah.
And so those guys had all gone to work for Genie. So I heard it was a good place. I just didn't want to move to Renton after moving down from
which
from
makes
Everett.
sense. Yeah, and having lived up there and done time out of it, I mean, you're like, you want to be back in Portland.
So the guy's like, I canceled the interview with you. He goes, why would you cancel? And I'm like, well, I didn't want to move there. And I know this guy and this guy. And he goes, you know those guys? I'm like, well, that guy worked for me. Yeah, of course I did. and then Vestas, they were looking for two types of windmill technicians, which I would have been a bad one because I don't do well with heights. I mean, I'll go up there, but I'm not looking down. And the second one was they had two technician spots that they were looking to hire. One's called a domestic technician and one's called a traveler. The domestic technician could go anywhere in the States, at the time, this was their explanation, for up to 30 days. The travel one could go anywhere in the world up to 6 months. I'm like, I've already done that. I'm really not interested. I could do training. I could teach your end users to operate your wind turbines.
I met a guy who did that. He actually apprenticed with one of the companies. I think it was GE he apprenticed with to do that. And he had to climb the windmill. Yeah. And he goes, and the first time you do it, it's really, really cool. And he goes, and then after about the 30th or the 50th time you've done it, and you realize that this is going to be all you're going to do, to him, it was just not his cup of tea. Yeah. And I thought, well, and there was always a guy sitting in the truck at the bottom waiting. I mean, there's always ground support for stuff like that. And then he explained, how the things worked, and it was amazing. And I thought, I could see where he was, he was super glad he did the apprenticeship because that was like a 60-day trial to see if you really had what it took to do that kind of job, because you're always climbing and you're always you need a tool, you're going to go back down. Yeah. There's no elevator, turns out, right?
No.
I mean,
and I salute those that do that work. It's just not for me.
That has got to be, you've got to be one in shape person to be able to do that.
Yeah. So when I sat with Siemens, they called me back for a second interview at their shop. And I sat down with the ops manager and another general manager, and I surprised them, not necessarily in a good way either, because they asked me where I was going, what I was planning to do. And I was like, look, I've been military for years, and that's a 24/7 job and no overtime. Give me a 40-hour-a-week job doing whatever you need me to do. I'll learn how to do it, because that was the other thing, is I had the confidence. Whatever you know how to do that, well, I can learn how to do that. Yeah. And I did all that. And I sit in the interview, and they're like, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? And I basically said, look, I don't really know a whole lot about this industry. I'm just here for work. You hire me to do a job. And
so that was basically 2005.
That was 2005. That was August of 2005. And one of the guy's jaws just dropped. He's like, what? I'm like, I'm serious. I'm here to work. Happy to do it. Whatever you have, I can learn how to do it. But I don't know what that means for 5 years from now.
What?
And he goes, oh, okay. What if you learn a bunch of stuff, maybe you get more towards an engineering position or something? Like, sure. Like, as long as it's work that at the end of the day I can put away my tools and I can go home and eat dinner, I'll do it. And so they offered me a job as a security technician, security installation technician, like the entry level. And they said, you have to go get an LEA, we'll facilitate it. And it wasn't IEC at the time, it was ABC.
Oh,
but it was still Eva Sizlove.
No kidding.
She was still there. And I asked and that's when I met Dave Gilson in the second class. Frank, what was Frank's last name? He was with Diverse forever. Canfield? No. I don't know. Anyways, Frank gave the first intro class about different verbiage. And then I went to Dave's class, Dave Gilson, and he started reading from the book about the basic electricity. And I suffered through precisely one class, and I went up to him and said, look, just so you know, my background is probably close to that of electrical engineer. I could teach this class without a lesson plan and any lesson aids what you're doing. Is there a way I can challenge the class or take a test?
Make comp out of this, this
please.
section, please.
Yeah. And he's like, well, we could talk for the board and you'd have to explain, your background, and we can look at maybe that, but why don't you move over to my communications class? And I was like, okay. And so, and I ended up going back and detailing out the amount of hours I worked on the ship and getting an old chief to sign it. And then I sat before the IEC board, and they asked, in retrospect, some very good questions about fish and wire through walls. You don't do that on a ship, or
stuff that you knew that we didn't know. Because I kind of had the same experience where I was like, they said, well, you've got enough to qualify to take the test. This is a JLA. This before it was an LEA. And I'm like, okay, great. What am I doing? And I knew obviously the theory and a lot of the other stuff, but you should see me bend pipe. I mean, I can't bend pipe to save my life. I hire that out because it's ugly.
I went to bend pipe the other day in front of one of the apprentices, Doug Bond, and he verbally stood there and cringed, and then he said, "Boss, here, let me." And
there are those who can and those who don't.
Well, it wasn't a big thing when I was an LEA tech for me because of the parts and smarts industry, which I'll get to in a minute. And then when you're doing turnkey and you're doing small stuff, it is a much bigger thing, but it is part of the license. And
it is a hell of a skill. It really is.
It is.
I certainly appreciate those who can do it because I'm in awe.
Yeah, but I've held a PM position now for 6 years. And before that, I was a designer, so I was behind a desk piloting AutoCAD. And then before that, I was a tech. Yeah. So when you look at that, that's almost 10 years of doing that.
So you went into security, but then
day one was fire. The position was for security because that's where they had room in their budget.
Oh.
And first day on, I show up at the office. I meet the boss. I'm like, hey, what's going on? They go, oh, hey, and the front light, it's just like, I've got his phone all set up. It's an AT&T or Singular. He goes, oh, no, he's going to Intel. So he'll need a Nextel. Should turn off that phone, and then he sat me down, and I got to watch 2 hours.
So you went right into the into the three, right into SD3 right off the bat.
And so
wow, and the toughest of the three. Yeah, my dad.
And so I was handed over to a guy whose his dad was in the industry, and he had gone to college to study history, to be a history teacher, and his senior year. That was what he told me. A bunch of school shootings happened, and he didn't want to be a teacher anymore. So I went to his dad and said, hey, can you get me something? And they brought him in as a day laborer. And then he was trained and taught very slowly, very detailed by one Gary Youngberg, who I think you'll be an upcoming guest. And then Gary decided to go to a different company. And so he was left with this bag of systems that he didn't know how and why Gary and was it two other guys that sort of set up all the structure and all the rule and why you do a thing. He was just moving it along, and it was great. I frustrated the crap out of him by how does this work? Right. Well, by obscuration, what does that mean? Because I was used to going down to the nano component on a system. And he was like, well, you put the smoke head in and you blow smoke and it obscures and it goes off. And I'm like, okay, what about the processor? Do we tear that down? I'm used to having to do it all. No, you pull it out, throw it away, put a new one in. And the first couple of weeks, he's like, we're commissioning a building. I'm like, cool. What is that? He goes, well, it's commissioning. And I go, remember, I'm new.
Mm-hmm.
And so he goes, okay, well, we'll go out there Thursday. We went out there and he had some paperwork and he had this little can of something I didn't recognize and a stopwatch. He goes, these are Vestas. Like, okay. He goes, it's air sampling. It pulls air through this pipe and runs it through a laser chamber and measures smoke. If you get enough smoke, it goes into alarm and the building goes off. I'm like, okay. He goes, but we need to check to make sure that the smoke travels through the pipe within a certain time frame.
Mm-hmm.
So you do this, and he holds up this can. I'm like, what is that? He goes, it's canned smoke. And I was like, what? And you blow it, and you hit the stopwatch, and when the head goes into alarm, which isn't totally accurate if you actually know the code now, but then you stop it and you log it. Mm-hmm. And all these data points have to be within a certain parameter of the sheet. He goes, I was like, okay, I can do that. And goes, then you reset it, and you do the next hole, the next hole, next hole. There's 14 holes in this pipe. And then
you do every hole on every Vesda, on every tool there.
Well, and this was in a data center that was being built.
God.
And there was 14 Vestas on the cooling coils, and then one big area Vesda per pod. There was 2 pods, and then there was Vestas upstairs. There was 63 in the building. He's like,
nice.
Do that. I'm like, okay. And he walked away. And I came back to him at the end of the day. I was like, so I only got through 20. I guess I'll do more tomorrow. What do I do with this? He's like, you got through, let me see that. And you look through it. But, I mean, I can follow direction.
Yeah.
And basically, they were going to send me, like, this is September of 2005. It was September 23rd was my first day on the job. The following week, I was paired with this guy. And they got back to me in, like, October, like, hey, we're going to send you to 3 school in December. I'm like, okay.
So you basically, you started in September and were in EST 3 school in less than
December.
a quarter, in less than 3 months.
And then I started classes for the apprenticeship in January because I had to be a part of that. So
the cart was before the horse, which,
a little bit,
which happens from time to time.
From time to time, but I was
happens to so many people. It's not even funny anymore.
I knew basic hand tools. I knew how to use a meter. I could draw out a 3-phase distribution system.
God, I hope you know
memory.
how to use a meter.
Yeah.
But did you ever use a digital voltmeter?
Oh yeah,
a digital multimeter in the Navy. I used one. Everything else. I used was Simpson 260. Everything.
We had Fluke 77s. We had Fluke 77s.
That was the first one I ever saw, and I looked at that like my jaw hit the floor. I said, "It tells you the voltage. What kind of magical tool is this?"
We still had an occasional Simpson for checking induced voltage.
They only gave us Simpsons. That was it. It was honestly the very last command I was at on my 3rd and 4th ship where I actually saw a digital multimeter. Yeah. And then honestly, I would go, I'll take my Simpson. I mean, we use differential voltmeters for stuff, but I would always use, I just, it was so bizarre. And then now I wouldn't even imagine using an analog meter unless I needed it for the impedance.
We had Flukes for the lower stuff, right? And checking 480 and down. And we had these high volt sticks for the 5,000 volt stuff.
Which would make sense, yeah.
No, excuse me. And so I started there, and over time I gradually did more and more and more, picking up kind of like what I'm doing with Jason Wells out at one of those job sites and learning more. And then I got credit for some of the hours. And about 2.5 years in, they changed the 4-year requirement for LDA to 3-year. And all of a sudden I had my hours. I just needed to finish 2 classes, which was codes and this new OSHA class they'd put in. I did all that. I sat for the test in September after finishing codes in June. I did not pass the first one.
It happens.
You know, so
it's a tough test.
I paid my fee,
and
got my book
and there's
out,
a skill set
reviewed
to
it.
finding stuff in the code and you know, quickly.
And refreshed it up, and then I took the test again, and they said, this is where it's funny, the state sent me a letter saying I'd still failed the first test. I had to call them like, hey, I know I failed the first test. I got the memo. I don't need to be reminded. Can I get the results the second one? And the lady at the building, Tiffany, she called me and goes, hey, I've got good news. Sorry about that. You did pass.
Nice.
And so I finally had a card-carrying LEA, and I was still running work, and work was getting more and more, and I asked for an apprentice. They gave me...
So you've been in the industry a year, just a little over a year at that point.
Well, no, in industry about 2.5 years.
Okay, so 2.5
years.
Okay. Got it.
And that was when one of the main sites I support is a site Intel. They they were starting to do their first round of big builds in Hillsboro.
Okay.
And I was needing more and more people, and it's a unique client, and it is a very scripted way out there, and it has to be like nuclear power.
So that you could probably identify with the way that Intel operates.
Oh yeah, because
they absolutely don't mess around.
Semiconductor in general is a type of chemical plant. Just like refineries and other stuff that deal with high hazard chemicals, and at Intel they take two things very, very seriously. One is safety, right, and the other one is value, right. So they were willing to spend a little more for the right value, but they have an unparalleled in my 16 years in this industry, unparalleled safety mindset.
Right. Yeah, I've never been to any place that was like that. And so, nothing in all my years of being in the industry compared to the way Intel handles and they're not in a hurry. No. Right? They would rather take their time to make sure that it's right so that no one gets killed. I mean, and you're dealing with hydrofluoric and
they have a schedule to meet just like everyone else, but they don't have a schedule that's done irresponsibly, and they don't tolerate safety violations.
And their competency, the competency of their staff there is jaw dropping.
It's amazing. Wow. It's an amazing place to work, and I was exposed to that in the industry start, and then as I got more people and I ended up sort of directing them, I also wanted to take and start. I was bored at that point, and we had hired Gary Youngberg back, and so he got to see me as the field lead pushing all of his process that he had generated and left 7 years before, still in motion and perpetuating it. And then he opened the door further, more teaching why things were done. And it was just amazing to work with a man that had, at the time, 30 plus years experience in the industry.
He's incredible.
And now he's still in the industry. He's got his 45th year. Yeah. And he'll tell you, oh yeah, that came about from this, or I used to do that. I used to cut in sprinklers. And it was amazing boost to my knowledge base. And then he and I, even to this day, we collaborate greatly on means and methods and why and how to solve a problem or what the details are. And it's still incredible. He left Siemens not long after I did, came to PSI where I work today, and he's still doing it. And it's wonderful. And so
when he talked about throwing his hat in the ring for teaching fire alarm, I was thrilled. I was thrilled because both of those guys now who are teaching fire are both nice at fours. Yeah, they both have 45 years worth of experience. Yes. And I'm like, okay, I only have like 27 or something like that. I will gladly bow out and let you handle this, because there's nothing I can't teach Gary anything about fire. That's ridiculous. And it's like, and the best guy for these students to learn from is somebody who is as passionate about his job as he is and as good. And and anybody, and I've always said this, anybody who can master the three can master anything. There's no PLC in the world you can't program if you can program a three. It's that complicated. Yeah. So it's like, like an EST3. I mean, I just stand back going, I will bow and take my simplex training and go over here and work on a different system. It's like, it's quite okay. And there's no doubt that I other than Morris, I don't know anybody else in that world who knows it like that.
Knows it from that level.
Knows it from that level.
There's the applications of the development, but that only gets you so far. It's the practical going into a system and finding how it's been configured and then detailing it out stuff out. Morris is one of those people. Gary's another one. Yeah. I'm a very junior member of that club.
I tell everybody. I said Morris is the best on east of the Mississippi, and Gary's the best west of the Mississippi.
Having Gary join a group was like a shot in the arm, and it freed me up to go more into design. Okay. And so I was,
because he was back running the tech side.
Well, it's more like he was helping support the apprentice, teaching her how to do stuff. Nice. Or the priorities here, I could still direct, hand out assignments, but then it wasn't just me having to drop what I'm doing and come show them something because it was weird. Although that was still part of the job. I could do more AutoCAD work. I could do layouts, and I designed a renovation, and it was a 16 node EST3 with 3 VESDA for 2 buildings, including all the underground fiber and the head end and everything that. And it was a quick turn. It was supposed to be 8 weeks. It took me 11, and it was still kind of rough.
Yeah, that's a lot of work. That's a lot of work in 8 weeks.
And I was not doing the CAD. I was I was just drawing it all out, and I was handing it off to 6 CAD jockeys that were they were giving stuff like, no, this is wrong, updating it all by hand, handing it back. It was the first time I'd done that. And then I had a kid. My daughter was born right at the end of that, and so I had to have someone else cover my work briefly while I then came back, and then we built it. And then at the time they were starting this new design, it was design build. It was going to be high rise. It was going to have 1 million square feet of space, but it was going to have factory. It was going to have a 3,000 person cafe. It was going to have a 4-story atrium. It was going to have high hazard chemicals and high hazard acid waste, and all in one building. And they needed a fire system. And
this is this RA?
It was RA4.
RA4. Okay.
Yeah. And this time, the management at the company decided they were going to keep it all in house. They weren't going to partner with a firm. They were going to do this. We were just going to do it all ourselves. And that led to, a year of late nights, sometimes weekends, me and Cad, a couple other people, them flying in people because we were in a bad contract.
Yeah.
And I was supposed to be doing that on top of managing the group as well, and they had non-technical PMs come in and all this stuff. And that job almost broke me. It broke me of wanting to do design full time, at least right now. Not like that.
Yeah.
And
that's harsh.
About 4 months into the construction phase, they hired a guy named Ken to be the new supervisor. The original guy that had been my mentor, he became the PM, and then he became the ops manager for that group. And while we were doing the design work, he got approached by Siemens Colorado to come run that whole district as a zone manager or something. And so he left, and they moved the guy who had been the supervisor, who was a former PM, into that position, who had already said he was leaving in a year or two. And that guy's mandate was to find a replacement. And so we found a guy at JCI named Ken Ball. And Ken came in and was the supervisor and trying to just help get us out of these jobs. And he was a nice set for with 20 some years of experience. He used to write smoke control analysis for like Rolf Jensen, I think was the company he worked for. So he knew smoke control. He knew all the parts, and he could spit the code. And, and at the end of the job, he came up to me, like right as we were about to get occupancy, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing this one, because it was such a mind-blowing moment. He goes, look, the last 6 months working with you, it's been obvious that you have way more project management skills than these 2 project managers. So come Monday, you're going to be running everything. Those 2 guys will not be working here. And it was a Thursday.
Yikes.
It was a Thursday.
Yeah.
It's like whoa. Because I was an hourly, so I get overtime. I was a tech. I had tools. I had all this responsibility, and I could understand change management and scope, but like there was a lot to that to make that transition. I said, whoa, I'm not just going to just jump over. We have to discuss pay. We have to discuss lifestyle. I've been ground to dust for 2 years out here. Like, we know, not without a discussion. He said, you know what, you're right. We will have the discussion, and if we can't offer you what you need, then you can, we'll figure out what to do after that. But for Monday, I need you to be in charge. I will come out here. I'll explain to the crew that that's your role. You're going to be doing the papers, and that we'll be figuring out. And then you and I will sit down with the ops manager and have a lunch, and we'll talk through what you need. Just come prepared with what you need.
Wow,
and
that's impressive.
And I mean, he was a good boss. I liked him. He and I worked together for several years after that. It was 2015, and I obviously took the job as a PM. They gave me what I needed to pay, the trainings, the things. And about that time, Siemens wasn't able to really work on the Edwards platform anymore. They had once been a vendor, were no longer a vendor, but could keep their customers. And the jobs that we had built, because of how they were contracted and laid out, and they'd gone so badly, the Intel people were like, we have to diversify, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of all that, they came and told us they were bringing in Convergent to start learning how to work with that
Which makes sense because for those who don't know, Convergent's a huge EST.
Yeah.
It's a concern. I mean, huge.
And I was not happy because I just spent a few years
learning all that.
Well, I just spent a few years like giving up long days and doing all this stuff and having a poor work-life balance. Just have it be, we can't just have you do it anymore. And took it in stride, and I mean, the writing was on the wall. Eventually, it got to a point where EST was not going to, under any circumstances, support Siemens keeping out there. Mm-hmm. So I went to my boss and I said, and by then Ken had actually taken a job running the St. Louis branch or zone or something. He got a promotion and moved back east. So I had a new boss who didn't understand fire at all. And when you have a boss that doesn't understand licensure, doesn't understand fire, doesn't understand the scenery around and the building codes, it is a tough position to be as a fire alarm PM, particularly when they don't listen.
Yeah.
They focus on change management, they turn into their PM skills, and the details as a half watt, the details of the codes, the standards, the AHJs, that all matters, right?
Yeah, I'd say so.
And they were starting to flush that really badly. And after giving it a year and having them do some rather bad things, and this is 13 years in at this one company after doing 6 years of the Navy, and before that was high school. I don't move very often.
Yeah, I'd say so.
I spruced up my resume and posted it on the LinkedIn, and actually interviewed with one company, and it was going to be a decent opportunity, but it was a little too less money. So I ended up having a headhunter find me. And I'd known Performance. I'd bought parts from them for years. I knew Scott Leclerc. I was the one that recruited Scott to come to Siemens for a while, and then he eventually left and came back to Performance. And I was uneasy, right? And the first couple interviews were kind of weird for me. Not gonna lie, I was doing my best to be well. And it turns out that Performance Systems had inherited the Portland Airport, which was a big system, a system I had worked on and programmed. And they had inherited it from a service standpoint, but then they had to be embroiled in all this construction. They needed a PM. And so I was like, well, I could help with that. Yeah, I can come do this. And I also mentioned that I had some following with Intel. What I didn't know was that Intel had been courting PSI to do more work out there, because when Siemens left, they were back down to one, and they needed two. And
they needed somebody else to have as a backup. Yeah.
And so, two things happened in fairly short. First of all, anyone that's ever done and that's worth a darn as a TAC tells you a good metric of a company is the TAC. Right? Their attitude, what they think of the company, the environment you work in, and that's why if you ever get higher up into management, whether you're a PM, whether you're an ops manager, a supervisor, something, it is critical to sit down with your techs, in a more casual environment, take them for a beer, have lunch with them,
And you're good at that. You do that quite a bit.
And check in. What's working, what's not working,
happening?
What do you guys need? Because there are aspects of that job that are tough. But there are some things that are needlessly tough that you can alleviate. Like we don't have anywhere to work but out of our trucks. Okay, well, do you need an office space? Let me go get you a lay down. Let me go get you this. Well, it's going to cost money. Yeah, I'm going to go spend that money, and I'm going to explain that to the management why it's valuable. And so I called Jim Bramlage. Jim Bramlage, who is the service tech.
The service tech. I mean,
he is one of the most amazing, dynamic, nicest fellows I've ever met. He will go 180% above and beyond. Yeah. I called him up and I said, hey, I'm in this room and this Andy guy and this Dina person are trying to convince me that I need to do this, and it feels a little salesy. What kind of shop is this? And Jim said, oh, it's great. Great to take care of you. It's the place to be. And that was kind of like, okay, I'll meet Travis.
I didn't realize that Jim was the catalyst that helped make the decision for you.
Oh yeah. Good. Oh yeah. No, it's it's key. When you look at after being a long timer at one company, making a shift. And then so I started and moved over and was, making rounds, making introductions, learning the way the airport. I mean, I was good with the 3.
Mm-hmm.
I was good with learning what had changed inside headquarters building. I needed to understand all the contractual requirements and
those are nightmarish.
And
they're nightmarish.
Out there, they are horrific.
They're horrific.
And they're needlessly horrific.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And but I spent months getting up to speed at the airport, and I fired off a note to not like friends, but the professional work colleague at Intel, let him know I'd moved.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was over here, and he replied all with hill of his staff behind him and goes, "Oh, great, congrats. Any insight on the new role?" And I said, "I'm running projects out of the Portland airport, and if there's any work that PSI is hired to do at Intel, I'll be running that too."
And here you are.
And that kicked off a storm. It was a slow burning storm, but it's been a storm where, a week after that, I was invited to a walk to fix something. They didn't know how it worked. I was like, "Oh, I designed that one, so yeah, I know how that works." Apparently, they'd lost a few of my records, and so gave them a copy, and this is fine. It's kind of like a homecoming.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, "We want you to do more." And that was when you were my boss. I said, "Hey, if we're going to be serious about this, I'm going to need a team, and they're going to have to want to work there."
Mm-hmm.
Right? So don't ask them with me in the room. Don't ask them with the service dispatcher or the other, coordinators running projects on our own. Ask them.
Yeah.
And the one guy who I had worked with on a job, he wanted to learn it, and he is now the foreman of a crew of 3 other people. And he is out there setting the schedule, doing some of the politics, and he still has stuff to learn.
Yeah.
The other day I got called out there because they'd found an intrinsically safe barrier and they didn't know what it was.
I'd never seen that before, huh?
Yeah, it's a way to, it's just a way to have a particular electronic component in an area where it's Class 1, Division 2, where they could have explosive gases. You put this little safety barrier in, and
So you don't detonate the room?
Yeah, pretty much, yeah.
Good idea.
But it's not typical fire alarm, right?
No, because it's all super low voltage or
Yeah.
intrinsically safe or in rigid conduit or whatever.
Oh yeah, and so nowadays I'm having to really, I don't have that same flex on the field out at the airport, and there's way more politics and it's way more shifting. It's not as rigid because they don't have a centralized, knowledgeable person in house about their fire system.
Still?
Yes, still.
Wow.
And they have people that are learning.
Yeah.
And
it's funny that the gentleman who did do that is now
out at Intel.
Now working at Intel. So you're either working at the port or Intel. Yeah. One of the two. You're not, you're...
Well, and in that first year or so at PSI, there was this tendency of if you're a little slow and you're capable and there's an emergency, you jump on it and handle it. Right. And so I still have jobs. There's a high-rise in Hollywood area that's still going through its own realignment. I still have that job. I still have a job in Vancouver that I'm trying to button up because I'm having to build engineering resources, and it's exciting because there's opportunity. It's a little stressful because there's a lot. Mm-hmm. But as a PM, you're supposed to try to figure out where every job's at, keep it on track, move the resources in, make decisions about what you're going to fight. Some days, you don't want to die on that hill.
Right.
You're not going to go fight for it. You're just going to be like, whatever.
I know when you and I were working together closer, you would come in my office and say, I need, and I would just occasionally say, do it. Just do it. Like if you have to come and ask me, the answer is already going to be yes. I'm not going to sit here and tell you no. Yeah. I mean, why would I do that?
Right.
And my philosophy, as when I was a manager, was that the technicians are the machine. They're the machine that do everything. Yeah. Right. So whatever the technicians need, they need, and there should be green lighted all the way. And anything that doesn't green light it, then I must somehow work around that or plow through it to make sure that they get what they need.
Well, the good manager is the one that green lights the right things and investigates the sketchy things. I miss
working with you, by the way.
I miss working with you too. It was great.
It was fun.
Well, but it's also sometimes it goes beyond the PM when there's a political aspect that affects the company business portfolio. Like it was like an apartment complex. They moved a panel from one wall to the other, and they had power supplies there that were feeding power to the board. And he didn't know that panel real well. He thought those were feeding security stuff because that was part of his background. So he didn't reconnect them. And the board gave like a low power failure. Like it didn't have enough that. Yeah. Well, it was 3 weeks of Firewatch for the site that the, and we were proposing a new fire panel and we found Romex underground. It doesn't even meet code. All this mess. And it was for some big private property customer. And, they were like, well, we kind of want to be paid back for the Firewatch because we hired this other company that knows that panel, and they came and hooked the power supplies back up.
Yeah, they figured it out.
Yeah. After our guy was a really good technician, couldn't figure it out. And it was I remember mentioning very specifically because we said, okay, we'll go talk to him. We didn't give him a yes. Mm-hmm. He turns right around and yanks on the saleswoman's chain saying he's going to pull his whole contract portfolio, which is a dirt move. But
I remember that, yeah.
Which is scuzzy, but whatever. And at that point, it was, let's go look at what they did, right? And then we went and paid the Firewatch bill and the service call for this other company out of like a general bucket or something because it wasn't the sales guy's fault. No. Like he shouldn't be penalized, and the tech
and I think we covered it. I think we made that decision.
Yeah.
Within about an hour. Yeah. Of going out there, I'm like, we're done. Yeah.
Yeah.
We'll do it. We'll do what we got to do.
But when it gets beyond a PM and can have a tactical business portfolio, that's where you sort of have the top of your authority. You run the job best you can, but if you're going to go down a hill, you should inform the guy you work for, because if you piss off this contractor, this customer, or you're not above board in your choices, they could pull work from other areas. They could never want to work with you again. And that's a decision that's outside of the project. It affects the business, and that goes above, right? And so, it's kind of like when we come to responsible choices as a manager, tech says, hey, I need to set up an office. And you're like, okay, we'll go out and get yourself some table and chairs, or I'll go do it. Just give me a list, because you need an office. That's a practical thing. When they come back and they say, I need a $2,000 espresso machine for my office,
then we got a problem.
You go, whoa. We'll give you a $60 coffee pot and some grounds, right? You want the fancy stuff, you go up the street out of your own pocket. And that's just a huge example, but it's kind of like, that manager goes, well, do we need it, right? What's the application? What's the return, right?
They're always looking for an ROI, return on investment.
Well, and it's just responsible spending, because one of the things that I can fairly say about as a contrast between you and Mr. Green is that he has more patience explaining to the non-technical management, because eventually in any business that gets big enough, you get high enough, and it's about dollars and cents. That's all they know how, and that is its own trade and skill.
He was a master of being able to explain to the upper management the needs of the folks below him, and I was much more of a if you happen to question what I'm saying, then we don't have the relationship that I need, and I'm I'm not asking you because I've been in the industry a long time, and if I tell you I need this, and you're questioning why I need this, I'm questioning your ability to understand why I'm here. It was really a part of the reason why I chose to leave and go back and be a technician, was because I went, I'm either good at what I do or I'm not, and I am either going to be understood or I'm not going to be understood. But what I'm not going to do is to fight 360, right? 360 degrees, and in 3 dimensions. Like that's just a non-starter for me. And it's and the thing is that some folks like, and you're a good example of that, you can stay in those positions and make headway, where I just get to the point where I'm like, this is so frustrating on so many levels that it's no longer fun. It's like,
it's just stress.
It's just stress.
Yeah.
And when you went to Intel and worked as a tech, and still when you go back to Intel, you go to the port and put on your tech hat and act as a tech, you immediately you shed all of that, all of the project management and all of the design functions and all of the stuff is going at home, and you put your tech hat on and you go, you just there's a relaxing, I'm zen with what's going on, and I'm happy with it. And then I get in that mode and I'm like, I am never getting out of Zen. And then you're able to go, okay, I got to put Kate back on and go back to work. And I'm just like, I just want to be Zen for a little bit longer. Can you just leave me here and forget I exist for a while so I can fix something? Because it's tangible. It's tangible to fix a problem.
Right.
And look at the client or look at the technician and go, this is solved. Mm-hmm. Okay. So we're going to have to close it down here. Yeah. I do have a quick question for you, though. Yeah, what musical instrument do you play?
I used to play a woodwind saxophone and clarinet and flute a little bit.
No kidding.
I was in the jazz band, the concert band in high school. I haven't really picked that up since. I can still read, but the muscle memory is not there.
Yeah, that's just I never realized just how many musicians there were in this industry, and there was 11 guitarists when I worked at PSI.
Oh yeah,
I couldn't believe it. Mm-hmm. I'm talking three of them. Three of them were, top-notch guitarists. Mm-hmm. I'm thinking of Jason Wells and Jim Bramlage are both just phenomenal guitarists. And then Andy plays. It's just like, what? And then I find out that other folks were players too. And I just was, and I'm a huge I can't play. I just know when I hear it.
What they had found is that people who study music end up having sort of a leg up in math. And it has to do with time tempo and then fractions and like quarter beat, half beat.
Oh, I did not know that.
So they so if you can understand the concept of splitting a timepiece in half, just the concept, it makes the numbers and manipulating of those numbers and then the notes themselves part of that equation. I only got half of that because I never did any formal music like a music class where they taught you all of the scales and why the fours and the threes and all. Like I was just going to a band and playing what's on the paper.
That's nice. Well, Sean, I super appreciate you sitting down with me today. And
anytime.
I would love to have you back at some point.
Oh yeah.
I think I've only tapped about 1/10 of what I need to hear from you. So
we haven't talked about high temperatures affecting cladding of fiber runs over roofs and how it can crash in the SG3 system. It takes you here to find.
Now, see, I was just thinking about that. It was right on the tip of my tongue, and then you gave it away. Yeah. So thank you very much, my friend.
Anytime.
All right.
Thanks for listening to the Half Watt Podcast. We always want to hear from you, and we encourage you to email us at halfwattpod@gmail.com with questions or even your own stories. Funny, crazy, or praiseworthy, we want to hear it all. You can follow us on Instagram at halfwattpod to stay up to date on our feed. And be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And share us with a friend, the best way to help us grow. The Half Watt Podcast is a production of Now Hear This Studios.